to continue.
Okay.
So yes, now I'll introduce Dr. Elliot Pines, with a PhD from the University of California. I'll let you get right into it, Professor. Dr. Elliot Pines.
Right. Thank you, and I apologize in advance to translation. It's going to be a little bit fast and furious to cover everything properly. I hope everybody's getting the screen clearly.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Okay. Welcome to Stone, Paper, Scissors, Adaptive Child's Play. This children's game is actually of Chinese origin, evolved through a long later history in Japan. The rules are deceptively simple. Here shown in a clockwise cycle of conquest. Scissors cut paper, paper traps stone or rock, and stone or rock crushes scissors. Other modern versions include 5 elements, as any odd number works to keep the odds balanced, with the same number of possibilities beaten by your choice as beating your choice. As you likely know, while stone, paper, scissors is a name in use, the common name, as indicated in the slide, is rock, paper, scissors. I have specifically chosen the minority form, as while generally formed by natural erosion, a stone's smoothness has a human-made sense of design purpose, as do scissors and paper. So categorizing, I feel to be the first psychological step in the further evolution of this game for the children of the integral world. What I mean here will hopefully become clear as we proceed. This simple game hides a sophisticated mathematical principle, a sort of statistical paradox that began to be unraveled in the 18th century by the Marquise de Condorcet, with its full implication only realized in the 20th century, where it was used to secretly manipulate the odds in elections and competitive sports. In fact, the paradox renders an isolated internal comparison or competition ever more vague and ultimately impossible as an integral system evolves in size and complexity. Note, though, that true paradox in the mathematical sense is only possible, in fact required, with the nullification of logic in the face of axiomaless, boundless infinity that logic inevitably leads to. Take, for example, Galileo's paradox, as shown in the slide. The perfect squares are an infinitesimal subset of the whole numbers, and yet are in one-to-one correspondence with them. However, at no point along that road do the laws of nature, of cause and consequence, ever cease. We just discover deeper roots and higher branches. There is no real paradox in the finite, but there is also no limit to the depth and breadth of those laws. And inevitably, our mental map of reality breaks down, and we must course correct it. Trained from childhood in comparisons based upon single aspects of an isolated relationship, we can be fooled by the multidimensional nature of real objects, including people, especially in the relationship to other members of the system as a whole, and the surrounding environment, the broader system. Indeed, the whole is greater than the linear sum of its parts. This is why, in system thinking, independent perfection is a detriment to the whole and ultimately the part itself. We note that cancer is the perfect independent cell that would live forever were it not for killing its host and so itself. This is one aspect of the system's adage, perfect is the enemy of good enough. We'll return to this theme a couple of times. A quantitatively symmetric version of a basic 2D anchored non-transitivity, just to give an example, is this 4-die set discovered by Stanford University statistician Bradley Efron in 1970. The next in the cycle will beat the previous one with 2-to-1 odds. The two dimensions in this case are how large the numbers on a given die are and how many large ones there are compared with the competitor. Returning to stone, paper, scissors, one wonders if this wheel of fortune can't spin the other way as well. Offhand, yes, but it's simply the negative of the primary direction. Instead of who beats who, it becomes who is beaten by who. Thus far, this classic law of the jungle game has only evolved further in its ever-hardening egoistic paradigm, much like humanity itself until now. Earlier versions went back to nature and at least took the form, specifically in the early Japanese version of Mushi-ken, of ecological balance in its harshness. However, if the ultimate goal of systemization was homeostasis of subsystems through continuous destruction of their parts, the non-existence of the finite itself, ab initio, would have been, well, infinitely more efficient. Let's see if there isn't hidden within a broader non-transitivity here, a benevolent systemization, bidirectional in the simple game model, and every which way in still larger dimensionality. A stone can pound bent scissors back into shape and sharpen the blades, remove creases from paper and help it stay in place. Paper can smooth a stone paperweight and gift wrap it. Gift wrap scissors and provide art material to work with. Scissors can cut paper dolls to delight a child or beautiful artwork and decorations. Cleave facets into gemstone, greatly enhancing the beauty and value. All lovely thoughts, but is this the reality of our world? Yes, and ever more crucially so. There are 4 ideas about a system that I think we should discuss at this point. Firstly, there is a purpose to satisfy the initial desire. Of course, if that beginning isn't fundamental, or if that end isn't an ultimate, all-inclusive closed loop, in short, infinity, then the system in question is only a subsystem of the finite. More generally, finite means connections cannot be zero, infinitesimal. Thus, even if under the radar screen, everything is connected, even components and systems that might be still hidden from our senses and minds. It also means nonlinearity and universal fractal geometry of structure and dynamics. Specifically regarding the node interconnect abstraction of systems, this means scale-free networks everywhere you look, even above space and time, as realized in the relatively recent amplitude-hedron theory in physics. Paradoxically, this implies ever-growing practical diverse complexity towards an abstract simple unity. One result of this is the nearly asymptotic fit of larger, more complex systems with a failure rate function discovered by Walody Weibel about 90 years ago, but not published by him for close to 2 decades. And he was a cautious proponent of it even then, being such a radical approach for the time. Industry and the military also took a lot of convincing to use it. Only decades still later did it come to be fully understood theoretically and empirically, becoming ever more useful as system sizes grew. This function is a generic, empirically fit fractal. Present research indicates that using a mixture of fractal functions can pull the asymptote closer in for finite systems, and in fact, the alpha fit parameter of the Weibel function itself changes over the typical life history of a system, forming the well-known bathtub reliability curve seen to the right in the slide. Secondly, there is equifinality, and for subsystems, this can appear as an independent and imperfect homeostasis. One can be fooled by such a subsystem regarding its true support purpose, goal, and certainly regarding the what, where, and when to judge success or failure. Until working in systems engineering, I, like many, naively thought the statement, perfect is the enemy of good enough, to be a call for mediocrity. Quite the contrary, this applies to a part in a greater system. Good enough for the part is generally optimal for contribution to the system as a whole, not to mention development budget and schedule for that system, and even for reaching quality excellence of that system. More on this when we talk about what is known as the Pareto distribution. Thirdly, there are, so to speak, 4 worlds, levels of abstraction applying to system description. A, nominal, names born of the initial diversity into separate nodes, components to be connected into the system. B, ordinal, establishing a sequence in space-time information, hierarchy network connections for the nodes. C, interval, adding measures of the differences implicit in the ordering connections. And D, ratio absolute, adding relative values to the nodes or possibly setting absolute values by defining a 0. The first set, A and B, constitute the qualitative aspects. The second set, C and D, the quantitative aspects. Fourthly and finally, there are 2 alternate structures that are the main alternative structures that are the mainstay of level B amidst the array of interconnections: asymmetric linear series and symmetric circular parallel structures. What we might call in terms of industrial organization systems, hierarchical factory, that is management to workers, and team, equal level group, respectively. Interscale communication can lead to a middle line of evolution between them, as the formation of integrated product teams, IPTs, can happen in industry. The subsystem evolution in this, by its fractal orbit chaotic nature, has its butterfly effect. However, this is not one of exponentially growing entropy, but rather local feedback to adjust global development. In short, it is information exchange. There's also a kind of analogy here in the mathematical physics of light, the interplay from source onward of divergent and curling electric magnetic fields with their space and time variations, leading to the spreading of light and the information that it carries. In the 19th century, Sir Francis Dalton discovered, in contradiction to his own social Darwinist thinking, the principle of collective intelligence, in common parlance, wisdom of the crowd. He discovered this through the mean value of his experiment, but published based upon the median, although his mean was 9 times as accurate. In fact, review of his data proved that he was mistaken. The actual mean of the data was even more accurate than he thought. Nonetheless, his reason was that, as a method, the median proves more stable in the limit of few people. In this regard, let's make another important fractal observation of systems, which, on a deeper observation, has notable similarity to the Weibel function. The Pareto distribution, from the first early 20th century empirical study of human wealth distribution by Vilfredo Pareto, his observation of an approximately 20-80 rule of thumb in the case of amassed wealth remains fairly accurate in the face of more precise mathematical formulation of later theoretical development. To explain, 20% of a population tends to hold 80% of the wealth of that population. Further analysis demonstrates this to be a fractal. So 20% of that 20% tends to hold 80% of that 80%, and so forth. It is found that this rule applies not only to all human systems, say percentage responsibility for successes or failures for certain types of projects in a large organization, but to the subsystems down to elementary components of any large system. We return to another dimension of perfect is the enemy of good enough. This being, per the point on the lower right corner of the slide, getting at the last 20% of your part perfect would take 80% of your time. Don't do it. In regard to collective intelligence systems, this would seem to be aligned with Dalton's stable median in regard to individuals at the right time, right place, and or with the right expertise with some finite volume in the space of possible systems. We do find, however, that while the median region people might provide, say, 80% of what we need for a given task or question, full communication expands into wisdom of the crowd. And for larger crowds, especially, we could approach 100% capture. However, something much grander awaits. For one thing, it seems that modular structure within a group helps. Though this eliminates some information, much of that is noise due to random local variations and small local gradients of long-range biases, including legitimate, unique environmental information that is, however, irrelevant to the decision at hand. The result is a potential rise in accuracy proportional to subgroup number. That is when it's equal to the square root of the total group number. It's a maximum curve, as seen in the chart on the left. The chart on the right represents A, the tendency in animal groups, and in fact, scale-free networks in general, to form strong local interactions and weak subgroup representative interactions with other subgroups, leading to a sort of Republican versus purely Democratic full group decision-making process. B, a simple model of this is a two-tier structure. And C, a theoretical microexample of how this Republican process leads to lower information. A 5-4 majority black vote on a tier 1 becomes a 2-1 majority white vote on the final decision tier 2 result. For another thing, there can be more tiers than this model indicates. And for still another, their internality may be more complex. And for a third, all these may be dynamic and problem-solving ideation, situation dependent. Oh my goodness. I got a problem here. Rashad, I'm trying to get there is a video I'm trying to get going there, but I unfortunately I can't. It's taking too much time. Oh my goodness. Okay, we are going to lose that, unfortunately. It's just showing. It's a very nice video, and it shows the flow. Oh.
Dr. Pines, you have about 1 minute left, so maybe you can start summing up.
Oh my goodness. Well, that includes questions. I need like 17 and a half, 18 minutes. Do I still have a few minutes going into the questions?
Yeah, you still have about 5 more minutes with the questions.
Yeah, I'd like to use some of that. It's important. I'm sorry, because I had a very, very nice, oh, wait, there it is. All right, let me go as quickly as possible. Recalling those 4 worlds of a system, we might think of our collective intelligence at the nominal level, allegorically, as a higher dimensional symmetric polyhedron, and from ordinal level down as its projection onto a lower dimensional space, specifically the identical sides making up the hypersurface, one less dimension of the object, project asymmetrically into the lower dimensional spaces. This concept is represented on the slide for the cube onto the plane and the tesseract 4D hypercube onto 3-dimensional space. The video covers this better with some more general projections to help clarify the matter. Though still leaving out the full asymmetry of the vast majority, there are higher dimensional objects still that projected down into our space give even far more complex possibilities. The point is that the sides of the higher dimensional objects are all equal in the absolute generality of their nominal state, so to speak, but project into complex specific forms in optimal response to specific direction of a question or task. The entire group form a map back to the global origin, but here, from one to a minority of sides may alone form the essential outline, the Pareto 80%. Move on. We note that a fractal sea can become the root of an even greater, more complex projection unfolding into lower dimensions, with a vast kaleidoscope of universes spread across the variations of the constant ruling over its formulation. Now let's look at the most densely complex natural network system in the known universe. It's inside your own head. An amazing discovery was made in 2017. Not only is the brain fractally tiered as any complex system, but it uses modules, at least at tier 1, that are multidimensional structures. These are typically up to 7 dimensions, but even up to 11 dimensions have been found. Of course, our brains can only offer a 3D space for these, so it is rather a 3D shadow network of what would topologically correspond to higher dimensional structures. What is particularly amazing is the integral communication in the brain's network that rapidly assembles such a complex as needed for whatever challenges posed, with asymmetric interconnection weighting developed as appropriate to the task. It is also noteworthy by analogy that in the archetypal Hopfield neural network, while a root system of n nodes can be weight programmed to only hold a set of information proportional to n squared down to less than n, the number of possible problems that it can deal with is proportional to 2 to the n divided by that number. In terms of collective intelligence, this would mean that essentially every node will have its place in the totality of the system situations, perhaps many times over, to be crucial to the success of the whole. Finally, these past decades have been noteworthy in regard to concretizing the road to artificially intelligent mechanism being able to ultimately take over, or at least radically simplify all human occupations, but one: social transformation and cohesion in the face of new realities. It is here in particular that countless projected systems could occur in the acceleration of what we might call the globalization singularity. In nature, emergent integral communication has led to amazing self-arrangements in communal problem solving and tasking. If we learn from early on to look toward our mutual responsibility rather than selfish competition, if we unleashed humanity from the destructive selfishness of our individual and subgroup egos, would we not be free to aspire to a new form of integral communication, especially available to cells composed of the human genius? If our stone, paper, scissors worked in every direction to bestow mutual benefit, would not the humanity mind shine in the higher light of a bright future for all and each, every individual gaining unique importance in this interaction beyond whatever we could now imagine? So let us begin with today's children, so that these adults of the future might at least be able to solve the problems that we left them, and hopefully innovate better, holistic ways so as to manifest a truly good destiny. Don't we owe them that much?
Thank you, Dr. Pines. We have 1 minute left for questions specifically for Dr. Pines, and then we will move on to general Q&A. So if there's any questions from our Zoom participants. Okay, so we will take one from some of the written down questions that we have. And the question is, what is the trick of, or let's talk about what you just spoke about right at the end. Let's take that question. Is it possible to transfer the model of this game, the rock, paper, scissors, to the development of human relations?
Yes, I think so. The example I gave in oh dear, I don't know, I can't say I agree with you, but where I showed actually the hand showing different sharing. In other words, if we go both ways, we take a positive aspect, and this is a model for children. How we could share. I mean, in fact, it's an interesting game. How would you take these things and more competitively? I would even go to as I said, there's a 5-version, larger versions one to start with, and one involves Mr. Spock and something else. It's interesting to have like 5 levels, and then turn that. How do you turn that into instead of a negative sort of thing? How could you turn that into mutual help? In other words, they are great because they give, and by the way, it goes both ways because the other way gives too. How do we combine these things? And then finally, how they give to every component, not just the immediate ones to each side of the circle. And you begin to develop that dimensionality. It's something to be developed, yeah, but I think there's a lot of potential in it.
Thank you, Dr. Pines. We will continue with Kelechi's question. Would you like to ask it yourself, Professor Kelechi?
Yes, thank you. Professor, this is amazing, actually. I'm really impressed, and I'm thinking of how I can use it, because most people use this game like rock, paper, scissors. How could I simply, not too scientifically, use this to explain to children the idea of collective sharing?
Well, I think it's interesting. It's almost automatic. They understand. It's just not stated. This non-transitivity paradox, which basically already ab initio says, is something interesting. Their challenge, they've just especially gone second grade and they've gotten greater than or equals. And you ask what is the concept that something is always greater than or equal to? I remember for second grade school project, I helped my son, and what we did was a little scenario where the kids were that a mathematician was going to come and talk about this idea. And he was beginning to, and he said, "That's silly. What are you talking about? Three is greater than two and less than four. You can't change that." And he said, "Okay, I have this set of 4 die, which is the die I talked about, right? I'd like you to do a little thing for me. I'm going to come back next week. Why don't you tell me which die is better than which? See which dies are weaker. And order me. This is the best die. This is the worst, etc. Go ahead." And they go crazy. They go, they thought they get it first, then it contradicts. Wait a minute, this can't be. They play across, and it's random. And by the way, it gets extremely complicated. I have one paper on that. One reference to that in my paper. It was interesting, done by middle school, high school students working with faculty at faculty at MIT. It's a very, very interesting program there. And they really got it, and like all the complexities of this thing. And so it's not such a simple question, is it? It becomes who's better than who, and that's not necessarily in a complex system. We're losing definition here. I mean, in physics, you have an analogy. It was the first time you come in contact that you have what was called father theory, which was a one multidimensional theory that had a 10th and 11th dimension, which were both of time. You say, wait, how's the time a ball? How can time be a 2-dimensional surface? Which way is, where's, I know where I am, but where's past, future, and past? And it begins to lose meaning. It fades out. So I think it's a very good, introduction. Kids can really understand this. You can do it tangibly. You have the die as you would have markers and such. And even grade school kids can really pick up on this and can develop in something very, very interesting. Thanks for the question. It's a very, very good one.
Thank you, Dr. Pines and Professor Kelechi. We have now our general Q&A session.